Hello, my name is Adrian Griffiths. I'm the Group Board Director of Chapman Taylor, and today I'd like to talk to you about Coventry City Centre South and our proposals for it. Most importantly, it's all about the importance of place making. So before we get into the detail, I think it's important just to remind ourselves about our town centres and how, in my view, evolution is going full circle. If you think about how town centres would have been 100 years ago, they were proper communities. People lived there, they worked there, industry was embedded in the centres, there was retail, there was food and beverage, markets popped up, fairs came into town, circuses are there, proper entertainment. And a lot of that has been lost. But we can't forget that what people do require and what they seek are social experiences. In terms of this project, there is some funding that has been provided by the West Midlands Combined Authority. We're working with Shearer Property Group. We've worked with them before successfully, Grand Arcade in Cambridge and Southgate Bath, just to name two projects. Sitting underneath us, there is a series of all the consultants that make up the consultant body. But Shearer Property Group have a joint relationship with the Coventry City Council. They're working together as a team, but Coventry have a team sitting beneath them as well, who are working and checking what we are doing. In terms of the city, for those of you that don't know where it is, Coventry sits in the centre of the country, very close to Birmingham, but more importantly, it's only just under an hour away from London, so very accessible to the capital. Coventry is the 12th largest city in the UK. But even though it is a large city, the actual core of Coventry is very small. I'll come on to the detail of this in due course, but Coventry was heavily bombed during the Second World War. And the post-war planning included for this sort of major inner ring road, which you can see if you look at my cursor, and that has very much tightened and controlled the size of the city centre. City Centre South is this turquoise area here, and in effect we are demolishing the majority of the buildings, or proposing to demolish the majority of the buildings in this zone. As I say, the Coventry was bombed very heavily during the Second World War, very much targeting the cathedral as part of the Baedeker bombing, which they successfully did. But prior to the bombing, the city architect of that time already had in place a new vision for Coventry. He wanted to take away many of the historical buildings and introduce these new strong boulevards, major public areas with modern buildings. And his view, he wanted to create, his vision was for a fresh, clean, bright and modern city. And that is what he went on to deliver. In fact, he demolished more of the heritage buildings than the bombing actually achieved. Now, some of those buildings have stood the test of time, but others just have not. A lot are low scale. The public realm is quite poor in quality. The city does not have an appropriate sense of place, and now is the time for totally repositioning the city. But this is not something that Coventry hasn't done before, so we can do that again. And if you look at what we have today in terms of the built environment, it is low scale. We've got key buildings like the indoor market, which sit in the middle of a service yard. We've got tall towers that sit in the middle of the streets, blocking views. We've got major multi-storey car parks that take up a lot of prime land, which aren't appropriate in that location. So the reality is it has run its course, and we need to now totally reposition it. As I say, Coventry has always been reinventing itself. In terms of where we were back in the Industrial Revolution, Coventry was the height of sewing machine making, also watchmaking. They designed and built the Starley safety bike. Frank Whittle, the designer of the jet engine, came from Coventry. And of course, car industry has always been heavily embedded in the city, as it is today, including for the delivery of the first electric traffic. In terms of the built heritage, the city centre, the cathedral was the new cathedral is a fantastic addition to the city, designed by Sir Basil Spence, a great example of a modern building that still has the sense of place of Coventry, and something that we want to take as an inspiration for our proposals moving forward. In terms of the site itself, the strategic location and the opportunity, it is a large area. As I say, the red line is the planning application boundary. The turquoise identifies those buildings that we are going to demolish. The indoor market, the circular building here, is being retained, and its presence being better respected in the master plan. When you look at the typology and the breakdown of the uses today, the site consists of, retail, 41% retail, 44% of the site is taken up with car parking. There's a little bit of offices at the upper level and some food and beverage, but that basically is it. In terms of the opportunity and its location, the City Council are already working on the repositioning of the station and what's called Friar Gate. They've built over the inner ring road to provide at-grade access directly into the city centre, and there's a major development that started to take place with the council moving to new offices in this location. So the initiative for rebuilding has already started. In addition to that, we have the upper precinct and Cathedral Lanes. Cathedral Lanes, an outdated shopping centre, has already been repositioned into a restaurant destination by Shearer Property Group. Shearer Property Group are also working with JP Morgan on the repositioning of upper precinct, taking away many of the modern additions and returning to those buildings to the way they would have been when they were first built. There is going to be some space to the north which will decline in terms of its retail offer, but a future opportunity for new uses in due course. But sitting between these two initiatives is Coventry City Centre South, an ideal location for regeneration. And when we look at the issues with the site today, or actually if we look at the issues of the whole of the core of the city centre, is that when it was replanned after the war, the community was removed and they just put back, in effect, just retail. Even the leisure and it all sits outside of that retail core. And having retail purely on its own is not a successful solution for an inclusive city centre. So moving forward, we need to see how we can fix the problems from the past. And when we look at the poor permeability and legibility, you can see that, with towers sitting in the middle of streets, you don't know where you're going. The scale of the buildings are very low. You don't know where you're going from one space to the next, and the legibility is just literally very poor. And the architecture, it doesn't relate to Coventry. It's not authentic, and we need to come back with a solution that is authentic for this city. Again, you talked about the indoor market sitting in a service yard. The retail arcades that do exist don't go anywhere. The main space Bullyard, you can't see where to go from that. And as I say, the quality of the public realm with the tower sitting in the streets is very undermining. But in terms of the site and the importance of the authenticity, we need to listen to or look at the past of the city and see what lessons can be learned. So if we look at Coventry and the historic urban grain before the war, the red line here that it sits on this historic map is the site boundary. You can see just by looking at the plan that there was a proper network of streets and squares of different hierarchies. And you can see within the individual building blocks that there was a variety of individual buildings that sat within that as well. The scale was broken down. When you look at the images on the left, you can actually see that there was a strong sense of place. You can see that the city had evolved over time, and you can read the architecture or the dates into those of when those buildings were built into them. So there was a proper palette of materials, proper variety of different architectural solutions, an appropriate scale, interesting skyline, quality public realm, but fundamentally you can see the community in this urban grain, in this urban environment. So when we just compare what we had before the war and what we have now. So on the left is, well, on both images, it's Hertford Street. Left 1910, you can see it was a proper street, a proper mix of uses. On the right, there is no legibility, you can't see where you're going. It is just a mess, and the architecture has no merit. Again, when you look at the high street, yes, much older buildings, interesting public realm, but on the right, modern, flat elevations, poor public realm. It doesn't do anything for the city. So this isn't about just saying, oh, we're going to reproduce what the city used to be. We're going to learn from the past and interpret that in a modern way. So we're going to look at the proportion of the buildings, how the elevations were broken up, the interesting skyline, the choice of the materials, the quality of the public realm, and take those design cues and apply them to the design of the buildings that we propose to deliver in due course. So in terms of design principles, this is about authentic placemaking. And in terms of our core design principles, these can be summarized as follows. It is to deliver a comprehensive, balanced, mixed-use environment, to create a new strong sense of place, to create a new authentic quarter, and to create a legible pattern of streets and squares, to enhance the setting of listed buildings, to take architectural inspiration from Coventry's proportions and materials palette, and most importantly, to create a development that will stand the test of time. And in order for it to stand the test of time, this has to be about delivering an inclusive community, and an inclusive community, they require a progressive approach to well-being. It's not just about the uses. So taking the environment very seriously. And when we look about the uses, it's also, it's much more than just retail. Of course, retail is still going to be very important moving forward, but it is also about the leisure and the residential, to cater for all ages. It's about the workplace, the more co-working, flexible, agile solutions, about embedding health and well-being in the offer, and then the culture, especially the spaces that sit between the buildings, education linking with the university, and community representing and incorporated community uses to provide that rounded offer. So then again, just looking at the past, if we go back to the historical map, this is about reconnecting the linkages as they used to be. So you can see that we are creating new connections in locations where historical streets used to be, to create a seamless and permeable environment. We are then breaking that up into a series of individual building blocks of a size that is appropriate to what the city used to be. So these streets need to be very simple in terms of their plans to ensure that we create a legible patterns, street patterns and connections, and flows, natural flows that joins all of the quarters together. Then around these new streets and squares, we further break down the size of the individual building blocks. And then if you look on the sketch on the left here, we further break those blocks down even further into a series of individual buildings, responding to the grain that the city would have had pre-war. And then when we start to think about the proportions and the scale, the city today is of very low scale. The city needs to have a grander scale than that, but not be overpowering. So again, achieving an appropriate scale that would have an appropriate sense of place for the way the city used to be. And of course, if we want to bring all of these uses into this location, we need to be able to incorporate those uses at the upper levels. So when we look at the proposed ground floor plan today, this is actually a hybrid ground floor plan because there is a significant change in level as you come down Hertford Street of about 7 meters. But what you can see is that we are creating for a major new piazza that sits in the heart of the scheme. The indoor market is fronts one end of that piazza in prime location. We connect all the way through to the Methodist Church and the Wave, the new leisure building that has been delivered. And sitting in the heart of that is a new pavilion. It's a curated building. It is a major anchor and providing legibility from whichever way you approach this location. We also have some smaller spaces that take advantage of the level change. You come into what we're calling New Bull Yard at grade at the top end of Hertford Street, and by the time you get to this end here, there's actually a whole level change difference, and you step down a series of stairs to the lower ground level, but the opportunity for colonnades and balconies at the upper level overlooking this grand public space. And then when you start to look at the mix of uses we're putting back, you know, yes, retail is an important part, but it's only 12% of the overall mix. Residential forms a major addition, bringing life for all ages back into the city centre. And then in addition, we have the cinema and the leisure, we have food and beverage, we have the pavilion building, we have co-working, small element of parking, medical and hotels. And then when we just look at, you know, where we are today, so this is what we have at the moment. We have Bull Yard, the major space probably in this location. You can't see where you're going through to Shelton Square. It is low scale. You can see the towers in the background. And we're proposing to replace this with a new heart with an authentic sense of place. You can see the pavilion building, very subservient in terms of scale to the adjoining buildings. You see the new steps coming down from Bull Yard into the new piazza. You can see the indoor market at the back, now fronting onto this major public space. And when you look at the architecture, you can see that we're delivering a series of individual buildings that are created from a palette of materials that are appropriate to the city historically. And then just looking in a bit more detail at the upper levels, you know, the residential starts to come into play. We have a medical centre in this location here. We also have, you know, as I say, the pavilion, and the pavilion is a very important part of this scheme. It will be curated, it will be bespoke. In many respects, it is a replacement for the department store. It will allow for, you know, pop-up retail, the independent artisans, street food and restaurants at the upper level, some more permanent dining facilities opening up onto external balconies with views over the public realm. And at the ground floor, obviously, perhaps an indoor market area that is very different to what we have for the existing indoor market. So a curated building that is hugely important to the overall offer. In terms of the architecture, it's taken the cue or the influence from the industrial architecture of the city. You can see, as I say, it is very subservient in scale to the adjoining buildings, but it does sit in prime location and is a very legible building within the master plan. In terms of the indoor market, in due course, we would like to see that being refurbished, but it is a great community facility, and obviously something that we embrace with open arms. And this image here just demonstrates how that important offer sits in the heart of the new piazza, opening itself up onto this new quality public realm. It is a listed building, and the reason why it was listed historically is because it was one of the first buildings in the UK to have car parking that sits on the top of the roof. So again, coming down from Bull Yard to the steps, the grand steps that steps down, you can see the pavilion building sitting in the new public realm. The station sits beyond that, and of course landscaping, bringing greenery back into the city centre, the glue that ties the public realm together, is a hugely important aspect of this scheme. There is some co-working at the upper level, cinema again at the upper level, providing for that additional leisure activity. And if we then come and stand here at the top end of Hertford Street, we can see that we can see into Bull Yard and also down Hertford Street itself. So here we are, existing buildings on the left-hand side, Hertford Street stepping down to the piazza at the end with the indoor market, sorry, with the pavilion building, but looking through into Bull Yard, this more intimate space. And then when we go and stand at the other end of Bull Yard, you're looking back into that space, a slightly taller building at the end, providing strong legibility, residential at the upper levels with their own amenity gardens sat behind that, co-working at the upper levels, but also at ground, the food and beverage, the independent retailers spilling out into the quality public realm. And then coming in from the station, this is the approach from the station. On the left-hand side here, we have what is called the Reform Club. It's a listed building. The two buildings next to it are new buildings. They happen to be a hotel at upper level with retail at ground in this location here. But the design influences, as I say, is to create a series of buildings representing the palette of materials that would have been appropriate from the past, taking those elevation of proportions from the Reform Club, responding to that in a contemporary way, but obviously creating, as I say, a variety of buildings and stepping up from the Reform Club to respect the scale. You can see the indoor market, you can see the steps leading up to New Boulevard, this gateway entrance, and likewise the new street going up Hertford Street, with the Methodist Church being brought into play. When we look down Market Way today, as I say, you have these tall buildings sitting in the middle of the street. You can't see where you're going. Those towers actually have already been demolished, and now the new proposals will make way for a new street that is legible. You can see where you're going. You can see the pavilion building in the background. The buildings on the left hand side, BHS, and on the old Woolworths building on the right hand side have been retained. And you can see that the new buildings, in terms of the scale, step down and respect those buildings, but clearly a series of individual buildings delivered to create that variety as you move down the street. And then just stepping forward, this is what you have today in terms of Shelton Square. You can't see into City Arcade here, you can't see your way through to Boulevard, but moving forward, a totally new place, a strong sense of place, the pavilion building coming into the fore, a new street that takes you through to what we're calling the lower end of Market Street, the indoor market just on the right hand side here, an appropriate scale of buildings that support a backdrop for the pavilion building, and again, most importantly, the public realm being occupied by tables and chairs, with the restaurants spilling out into this curated space. In terms of an approach to the scheme, this is the coming in by IKEA. Unfortunately, IKEA are leaving the city, but you don't know where you're going when you come to this point. But a new gateway entrance in due course, leading your way through to the pavilion building. Yes, more residential at the upper levels here, but a proper gateway entrance into the core of the city. So fundamentally, this is all about creating a total step change. It's learning from the past. It's not replicating the past. It's taking the essence from the past to create an authentic sense of place that the people of Coventry will bond with. And if they bond with it, they will self-curate it, they will look after it, and it will stand the test of time. And that is the most successful way for creating a new sustainable community in the heart of the city. So it's development that will stand the test of time and will be here for many years to come. Thank you.